many of you have heard of public policy? We are going to have fun. For policy, we are going to talk about the history of policy, just one slide, and then what it is, who makes policy, or who sort of like propagates policy, what's the process like, what are the politics of a policy, and what are some of the types of policies that we make. All right? So for those who've come across policy, what does it really mean? Just a simple definition. What in your definition is policy? By the way, I have 3 books, so I'm rooting. I like this. As long as there's a book. Okay, so the most active person, okay, the most 3 active people. All right, and it will be a fair process. So I'll start with you. What's policy?
Hi, my name is Patricia. So how I understand policy, actually it's a guideline on your objective as a governor or any person who is leading an institution or even a country.
Okay, guideline or objective?
Policy is a set of actions that are
A set of actions
towards resolving a certain particular issue.
These are principles on which laws are based.
Principles on which laws are based. Okay. Okay, let's just go back. I'll pick you, don't worry.
It is the principle of action
Principle of action.
that is adopted by either an organization, an
Okay.
institution, or
Okay, thanks. You guys are technical. Good. One last one at the back.
The actions I want to take on myself. It can also be for an individual. It's not always that it's for organizations and individuals.
That is policy, but when we come to public policy, I think most of the ones that spoke earlier, it's in the public space. It's about governments, it's about principles, it's about action, it's about addressing an issue or a challenge. So let's think through the history. A lot of public policy work emerged after the Second World War, and that's because a lot of governments in the beginning were very prescriptive on how people should live. So authoritarian, can I say very, judgmental about people. And people began to resist that kind of leadership. And so because of that, after Second World War, leaders began to realize, or researchers and other people, economists, etc., began to realize that the mode of governance that has been adopted by governments worldwide is not working. All right? So because First World War, Second World War coming close together, and they're like, okay, how can we finish the crisis that we find ourselves in? And so because of that, they founded a way in which they feel like governance or government can respond to the needs of people. Are we together? Respond to the needs of people. So it was based on the understanding that there has to be a relationship between the governed and the governors. Okay? So the objective then was to pursue whether it was social, economic, or political development, but in a way that is responsive to the needs of people, so that there is equity and there is the achievement of justice. But politicians do it. Do politicians do it because it is the right thing to do, or simply because they want votes? So apart from pursuing socioeconomic political development, it was to do it in a way that has equity and achieves justice, right? Then, so we already went through what is public policy. I'll give you a few definitions, but of course, whatever was given here is really it, right? So in the broadest sense, public policy is a reflection of how people in political society define a good life. Okay? So it's not just about addressing challenges. It's about saying that these are the things we want and would make us feel like dignified human beings who are living the kind of life we want to live, right? And it's about how then people would want those they have chosen in government to try and achieve, to try and rather make that accessible, all right? Make that good life accessible to people. So let me ask, what's your definition of a good life? Okay, citizen-wise speaking. Oh dear, okay.
As a citizen, my definition of a good life is life where you have access to
basic needs like food, water, and shelter.
Wow, yes. Access to basic needs. She's not asking for much. Just dignify my life by giving me access to basic needs, all right? Okay, I'll not make you run too much. Because you've spoken, let me give her a chance.
My definition of as a good life is living in an environment that is free, fair, secure, and being able to access the resources that are basic.
Wow, exactly, right? We are not asking for much, are we? No, we are not asking. Next person.
Okay, in addition to what they've said, while meeting their basic needs, good life should provide an environment where humans are able to exploit their potentials.
Wow,
Thank
they're
you.
able to exploit their potential. So there are those who don't want to be given. They just want the opportunity to have choice, isn't it? And to be able to just be everything that God created them to be, right? For those who don't believe in God, then everything you want to be. All right, next, this table, yes.
I think also a good life is where the people around me love me and we are able to live with them cordially.
All right, so there's a sense of community and a sense of togetherness. Let's explore another definition. Someone called Thomas says, anything a government chooses to do or not to accomplish, to accomplish a certain goal. What is that slide telling us about public policy?
To me, it means that the choices or the action lies with the government.
Yes.
So much. The government has
that,
the power.
Yes, so that public policy has a formal way of being implemented, right? So that, yes, we may want as citizens, but there has to be a formal way with it which that response comes. And that formal way then becomes a choice for government, okay? Anyone wants to add anything on this slide? Let's just continue moving backwards. I'll come back to you.
Things that the government wants to do, they have to prioritize. All of them could be important, but they must choose which ones to come first.
So it's a choice. They keep having to choose, right? Then the third one by James Anderson is a purposive course of action followed by an actor or a set of actors in dealing with a problem or a matter of concern. What is that telling us about public policy?
My understanding of that slide is that it ties into the process of making a policy. So making a policy involves you doing research. And with research, then you're able to identify a problem, and then you're able to enable the people to take part in public participation. And then it goes through the cabinet, and then now the policy is approved by parliament.
Okay. So that's a purposive. There's an intention to which the process has, there's a formal process that is normally followed, right? Any other one? Different here?
A policy must be addressing a specific issue. That is what I pick from that slide.
All right, that's interesting, yes.
I think policies go into our homes. When you say by 6 everybody should be home, that is a policy in itself. And I think public policies and policies are timeless.
I think what they've already said, and also it's inclusive, not just about the government and the public, but other players like the NGOs and the civil rights.
Yes, that's another answer I was looking for. That yes, government is a very key and critical player in public policy making. But is it the only player? There are other stakeholders, right? So they are actors, and we are going to have a discussion about that. So the definitions of, I think we've already covered this. What aspects of public policy do you glean from the definitions? One of them, what citizens want, right? Improve or should improve people's lives. It is done by political institutions. It's not a preserve of government alone, but other people and actors can be involved. It's a matter of how government chooses to behave. Policy choices are taken by certain actors, but it's also a response to a problem. It could also be an opportunity, right? It doesn't have to be. Okay, so who originates policy? You guys are so clever. Yani, I'm wondering whether you need this lesson. Oh, yeah, for her, yes.
Thank you very much. It's made by the legal maker, but it's gotten from the citizen.
Okay, so legal maker and citizen.
Who make policy.
Okay.
I think we can also have people from the medical practice in case we have new scientific discoveries or we have new outbreaks of diseases.
Okay. So you notice what happens to policy from just her, she's a doctor, and what has she talked about? Health policy. What do you glean from that in connection with her being a doctor and her talking about health policy? Somebody says expert. So a lot of times, policy also originates particularly from interest groups. So as people, we always have a soft spot for something. So one of the things that I do research a lot on is youth in Africa. So her interest seems to be health. And the point is, as people who are aspiring to be in policy spaces, you must ask yourself, in the many things that you can do, what priorities do you have? And why do you have those priorities? Because unless as a leader you're able to identify that, all manner of interest groups will be coming to you. I want this, I want this, I want that. And sometimes it's not easy, or even you're not able to fulfill all the asks. There are people who influence policies indirectly. So think about why should Kenya be interested, for example, in the American elections?
So whoever is in office in America will directly affect what happens to us as a people here in Kenya.
Any change in policy by donors means the gains that have been made there will actually completely be eroded and will not continue. So obviously it tells you the funding structure and mechanism there has to change. And part of the people who originate policy, there's presidential pronouncements. So a president can make a pronouncement, isn't it? And then they work backwards. And ministries or, the minister in charge has to figure out how that is going to be implemented. So presidential pronouncements can lead to policies. Parliamentary action. How many of you have, somebody said they're advocates. How many of you have taken a private member's bill? Like you get a member of parliament, let's say you are an interest group, you want a certain policy to be passed. So assume you want a policy on disability, right? Or a policy on health, or a policy. You can identify a committee or a member of parliament, let's say from your county, and what do? You take them and you sort of like ask them to present it and see whether they can debate it and agree with it. And so one of the ones that a friend of mine was closely involved in is the tobacco bill, where they actually drafted it and presented it and used somebody, a private member, to present it. It was debated and debated. The politics of it, though, is that BAT and others took all members of parliament to Mombasa, and by the time the members of parliament came, there was no bill to be passed. All right? So we will get into the politics of that, but parliamentary action is another. Court decisions. What decisions have been made by the court, for example, that make policy? BBI is one classic example, isn't it? It was going to alter the constitution, the courts rule, and it cannot proceed, isn't it? So it's almost like a policy pronunciation in as far as, because policy guides law and it guides action. Another one, budget choice. Examples of budget choices. Can't remember which year. We actually did the analysis of the budget and we found that some money that had been allocated to relocate elephants from a place called Mount Meru. Cumulatively, the budget was more than the budget allocated for maternal health care. Yes. Now, okay, absorb the shock. Can you imagine? And those elephants, there was no indication they're in danger. So think about when the budget is read and there is a taxation increase in alcohol or cigarettes. What happens? There has to be a law or a policy that is put in place to implement that increase in taxation. Challenges and problems, and I think we already discussed that. So what happens? We get COVID. What happens in COVID? We start telling people curfew, or there is conflict or was it in Marsabit and some place in Tana River? What happens? There is curfew, those are policy pronouncements. Then citizens and advocates can speak on an issue and say, we would like this implemented, and if it makes it, of course, existing laws like the Constitution are a means to which policies are also made. So is what citizens want always the same as what governments deliver? Not necessarily. So public policy considerations, you have three things that are important. The first one is what we call policy choices, what we decide. And we've already gone through the process of how do we decide about a policy, right? Number two is what do we do, the policy outputs. And number three is the policy impact or the effect. So any policy, for it to be successful, unless we do these three things, it is as well as, because you can have a need, but as long as we haven't said or put a mechanism to say what we shall do about it, will it be addressed? Not really. And sometimes we actually make policies, we know the problem, we put policies, but if we don't implement, it means that the problem remains. So that's what we are saying here. And basically the point to make here is that the policy process then becomes so crucial for you to be able to achieve these three things, to achieve policy choice, policy output, and policy impact. Now, let's take the issue of policy choice. Why am I calling it policy choice? So you have, Africa has one of the youngest populations in the world, right? Not one of the youngest, it's the youngest population in the world. We have too many school-going children, right? We've made a policy choice. So a country like ours has made a policy choice to educate free primary education. But we haven't built enough institutions, and we haven't made secondary school education free, isn't it? That's a policy choice. Policy process starts with identify the problem and frame it. So we have our CDF resources. We have young people who want to an opportunity, an education opportunity. One person will say, "Ata wasipeleke shule, pay dowry." A second MP will say, "No, let's do driving school." A third one will say what? Let's take 70 doctors to KMTC. So you idea a problem, you frame it. So then you do a policy formulation by policymakers and bureaucracy and all those other people. Then if it goes through the process, you adopt it and legitimize it. Then you have policy implementation, and then you do an M&D. So you identify a problem. So what's one of the problems in your community? Youth unemployment is a common one, isn't it? Another one? Food safety, gender-based violence. So that's a problem. Teenage mothers. Those are all problems, isn't it? So we ID the problem, but framing it means that you begin to make meaning of the problem. So I'll give you an example. We can have 10 young people who are not employed. But if 5 don't want to work, they are still unemployed, right? Isn't it? So framing is about asking the deeper question about what is really the nature of the problem, how is it manifesting itself, what are the issues underneath the problem, right? So I was doing my research in Tanzania, and something very interesting happened to me. So the government, like in Kenya, says a young person is defined as 18 to 35. Lakini kwa wa Tanzania, in that particular part, if you are 24, ushakuwa mama. Ni mtu mzima. Mama lakini. Guess what the men tell themselves? At 40, kijana shupavu. So do you understand what they mean? Culturally, what they are saying is that a man who is over 35 is still kijana. Meaning, if you call them mzee, what you're insinuating, I believe we are adults, what we are saying is you're not sexually active and, shupavu-ish. You see? So that cultural definition, guess what it does to people? So you have a youth fund, right? You have a youth fund that says if you are between 18 and 35, you can come and get youth resources. But here I am a woman who is 24 and I have a child. Not even, I have a child. What happens? You are a mama. Siwezi nikaenda baraza la vijana. Can you imagine? So you see how we formulate policies and imagine that they will work. So what it means framing is you need to understand cultural nuances. You need to understand how are problems manifesting themselves in communities. Because it is in doing that that then you come to this second level of how do you formulate the policy to address very contextual local problems. And that's why so research helps you situate how does this problem sort of like manifest itself in our context. And on the basis of that, you can write for a policymaker, these are some of the options you have. So like if I was advising a policymaker in Southern Africa, I would say, how do we review this policy of giving resources to address this issue of those who are getting pregnant because of resources? In this other context, I would be advising them on how do we work with, whether it's religious leaders and address the cultural issues, which is more complex, to try and advocate for more kids going to school because they are children. One thing I have learned about policy is that unless you're addressing interests, you're not going to go anywhere. So the question becomes, how do you leverage, and it's nipe nikupe. Nipe nikupe. So how do you show this politician that anyway, if you do this issue, you're going to get re-elected? So you have got to be addressing their interests so that they can address your interest. And I used to find that so unacceptable. But, so the other day, that Form Nigani book, I'll find the right name. That Form Nigani book, again, remember, who are the policymakers? They're usually men, right? Many of them. What's happening? Do you think they're thinking about, what you said, not teenage pregnancy? Sanitary pads. Even water. So, do you think they are going to allocate more resources for contraception, for what, and what? It doesn't make sense to them. The point is this, so when I looked at how funding is done in this whole reproductive health sector, one of the things that occurred to me is that as long as you frame it as a cost, remember, there's always, hatuna pesa, unataka pesa zitoke wapi. Sindio? As long as it is not visible, this person will never see the benefit of why they should invest. But if you frame it as an